And so, when I got into the ministry, one of the first things I did was to establish a project monitoring team. This was not common because, since 1967, you couldn't have project monitoring teams in ministries of information. You typically will have that kind of team in project ministries like Works, because then you're able to track all of these projects and then know exactly what the government was spending money on. But I felt that the way I could establish the credibility of that ministry was, first of all, to set up this project monitoring team so that we could go to every single project site, no matter the remoteness of its location. I needed to see the project, talk to the benefiting communities, know exactly whether the contractors were meeting the timelines of project execution, and then report as accurately and professionally on some of these projects. I thought that to do that would mean that the people would have a sense of believing what I was saying. And every month, we made a point of publishing a project magazine where people could see for themselves the state of a project before the execution and the completion of the projects. In fact, in some cases, we had ongoing projects. This quickly established the credibility of the government because the people could see, not just from what we are saying, but in pictorial, in pictorial terms, exactly what project was happening where. So this was a very important thing for me because I felt that accurate, and responsible, reporting of what government was doing was part of public accountability. I wanted to make sure that that kind of accountability happened.
Which is where a lot of people actually see that the Commissioner for Information is important and the Ministry of Information of any state government is important. But in some instances, we also see them delve into politics. So, in many instances, you also had to be defending the governor where, yes, political contestations were involved. Yes. Would you have rather stayed out of that?
No, of course not. In fact, I went into government knowing that there were very strong political interests in Rivers State. And I had very strong views myself. I knew that, I would be the spokesperson of the administration. And I knew that it was going to fall on me to, to defend not just the administration, but the state. And I think I did that with every sense of diligence and patriotism because I felt that it was better to be on the side of the administration and protect the interests of the state than to allow the state to be carried away by people who had less than patriotic reasons. In fact, in the course of my work, there were people who simply told me that, look, we don't like Nyesom Wike. And I said, well, Wike wasn't a contestant in a likability pageant. Judge him on the merits of his achievements. And until I left, the administration had actually reconstructed over 200 internal roads. These roads were completely abandoned, some of them for as much as 40 years. The Igurita Chukocho Road, a federal road, for instance, had been abandoned for 38 years. Now, the administration fixed it in 7 months.
Before you joined government, you were highly critical of it, and you always maintained that there is no difference. I mean, I watched one of your interviews where you said there's no difference between the PDP and the APC, ideologically speaking, and the difference is in the programs that they have. Would you have, I was wondering, what then motivated you to serve, knowing that there is really no ideological depth to any of the political parties, as it were? In
all honesty, I wasn't interested in the parties so much because, you see, the mortality rate of political parties tend to be very high in Nigeria. I mean, who talks about the MPN these days? Who talks about the GMPP? My suspicion is that down the line, in another 5 years, who probably will be talking about the PDP or the APC. I couldn't care less about the parties and their fates. I was more interested in service to the people. And so the parties were like vehicles, through which you eventually got into public office. So my interest was not so much about the fortunes or misfortunes of these political parties. I was more interested in the direction of the administration. I was more interested in whether there was a social contract we could establish between the government and the people. And if I was sure that this was a direction I could influence in some positive ways, I wanted to be involved in that. I also recognize, despite my own ideological convictions, that politics is an impure, imperfect science. And so sometimes you may have to work with people you don't necessarily personally like. You see, but those kind of personal affiliations are not important as far as I'm concerned. My interest was always to see how we could serve the people of the state and change their material conditions. How, for instance, can we supply water to the people to drink? How can we make sure that, you know, in River State, for instance, we create alternative economies that can reflect the coastal character of the state? How can we make sure we start a visioning process that will see River State move beyond the extractive economy in the next 25, 30 years? I was more interested in those kind of things.
When you say work with people you don't personally like, did you have such an experience?
Well, you know, you would find people who may sometimes not think the way you do, but control the levers of power.
You're not referring to the governor, are you?
No, I'm not. You know, what I'm saying is, you know, you will find that in the course of politics, you know, there will be people who couldn't care less about this kind of sometimes ivory tower ideas about ideology, about service to the people, about what should come first. Should it be loyalty to the individual, or loyalty to your conscience, or loyalty to the state? So you find that there's always this distance, you know, between ideology and practical politics. I believe that ideology should be the set of principles that should inform social action. Some people are more interested in social action without ideological grounding. But I believe that whether people believe these things or not, you ought to be able to negotiate this kind of tension and yet work within the system and deliver service, which for me was the bottom line.
Do you see yourself as a politician now?
I see myself more as a public intellectual, as an alternative politician, in the sense that I don't really buy into this politics of demagoguery. I'm more interested in how the people can be served. How can we make sure that kids who go to school are able to have access to technology? How can we make sure that we build the capacity of people to create jobs for themselves?
Was that why you resigned?
I resigned because I thought I could find wider scope of participation beyond government in order to continue this kind of service.
Well, we'll take a moment now. When we return, it's a lot of grammar he's speaking, you know. But River State is one of the states that has experienced the secessionist protests from pro-Biafra agitators. What does Dr. Tam-George make of their moves and the calls for restructuring? In just a moment, please stay with us.